For the past half hour, he had been observing his attractive wife as she navigated her way through the ballroom. Her intention was to position herself as far away from her husband as possible when the ball dropped at midnight. She was surrounded by well-off and self-satisfied peers, acting like an elaborate dish served for everyone's attention. Executives from his workplace would kiss and touch her, particularly his obnoxious boss who had been born wealthy. He was well aware of this routine as his company's New Year's Eve parties had followed the same pattern for the past 2 years. During the first year, he had tolerated it, chalking it up to the effects of too much champagne. However, last year, the reality hit him hard, and he started making preparations to address the situation. Feeling a tug on his coat, he turned around to face Deirdre, Josephine's closest friend and co-conspirator. "Happy New Year, Mike," she exclaimed, reaching up to give him a somewhat pitiful kiss, an annual gesture. Their lips barely grazed before he pulled away and looked into her brown eyes. Deirdre was another socialite coming from a wealthier family than Josephine. And just like his wife, she was part of the upper echelon. Normally, he expected to see her usual self-assured smirk implying that she held some secret knowledge he didn't possess due to her high social status. But this time, he saw two new emotions on her face: pity and concern. "Mike, don't take this so seriously," she said soothingly. "She's just engaging in the custom of exchanging kisses on New Year's. She'll come back to you shortly without any harm done. She'll remind you how much she loves you." He gave her a doubtful look. Deirdre attempted to offer him reassurance. "She truly loves you, you know. It's just that she's very outgoing, lively, and impulsive, whereas you tend to be more intellectual and reserved. Sometimes she needs a chance to be around people who share her nature. However, being with them only reinforces her love for you. All right, Deirdre." Is that why she spent the entire Christmas party hanging out with her coworkers under the mistletoe? "We attend her Christmas party. And she spends the night dancing and being affectionate with her colleagues. Then here at my company's New Year's Eve event, she spends the whole night dancing and kissing, though not with my firm's executives. So by being intimate with everyone at the party, except me, she's supposed to somehow gain a new appreciation for me. It's an interesting theory. Let me ask you, is this her annual tradition of giving George the imbecile a dozen kisses, or is it her way of showing love for me by doing something she knows I detest?" Gotta hand it to Deirdre. She managed to look embarrassed. She couldn't meet my gaze, so she averted her eyes and tried to continue. "Mike, I understand you're upset, but you have to try to see it from her perspective. Don't you, Deirdre? I think I might actually understand, perhaps for the first time in our 5-year marriage." I turned away from her, went back to our table, reached into a briefcase I'd placed there earlier and pulled out a rather large, brightly wrapped gift. I turned away from her, took off the ring from my finger and placed it in the center of the bow. This would make her remove the ring to open the gift. Facing Deirdre, I extended the package to her. "I'm going to head out now. Please give this to your friend when she's finally able to break free from the crowd around her. Let her know I wish her a happy new year, and I hope she finds everything she deserves in the upcoming year." I began to leave, but Deirdre grabbed my arm. "Don't leave, Mike. I'll go fetch her. She's had too much champagne again. You need to take her home." "No, Deirdre. I don't have to. She has a room reserved here in the hotel. She's been here all day entertaining the men while I've been working." "Of course. You're aware of all this because you've been here with her. She has her own car, clothes, and everything she needs. I'm pretty sure at least one of the guys she's spending time with right now will be more than willing to accommodate her, or maybe all of them will. Don't give me that look. You fed me the same line last year when I gave her another chance. She's made her choice. And so have I. Goodbye, Deirdre. I have to admit it'll be a relief for me to never have to see you again." Walking out of the ballroom, I gave a nod to Helen, the HR director. I had spent the first half of the day with her while my boss and his buddies were busy setting things up at the hotel. To be honest, he was actually in a fancy suite, which he paid for using the company credit card. Sleeping with my wife, that is. I should correct myself though. They were actually sleeping in the luxury suite. My wife and I have evidence in the form of photos and videos to prove it. Helen also has some of this evidence, and the chairman of the board will be informed about it very soon. After leaving the ballroom, Helen and her husband moved toward the group of men surrounding Josephine. Deirdre was also navigating her way through this group of men, some of whom persisted in attempting to kiss her as part of the tradition. A few men tried to flirt with Helen, but her husband's disapproving expression, a former American soccer forward, seemed to discourage them. Helen made her way through the crowd until she reached CEO George Burke and his companion, who were just ahead of Deirdre. A few feet away from them, she paused with her husband and observed Deirdre's puzzled expression. Then the sound of Deirdre's name being called out sharply caught Joe's attention, causing her to break away from George's embrace. Upon noticing her friend's surprised look, Deirdre frowned. Helen, on the other hand, smiled. Deirdre held out a beautifully wrapped gift and said something to Joe, who accepted the package. She leaned in closer, appearing to ask Deirdre to repeat what she had just said. "Mike left this for you. He's gone, Joe." Deirdre told her friend, "He watched you flirt and make out all night. And when you started making out with all those men, he gave me that package and left." Joe grinned. "Oh, you know, Mike? He gets all worked up when I don't pay attention to him for a little while. I'll go home, say sorry, give him a good time in bed, and everything will be back to normal. He loves me. Even when he's mad, he leaves me a gift. Let's see what it is." Deirdre tried to interject. "Joe? I don't think it's a present." But Joe was already busy untying the ribbon to open the package. As the ring fell out and hit the floor, there was a pause. Joe looked puzzled and asked, "What's this?" George, who had been watching, bent down, picked up the ring, and extended it toward her with a smirk. "Isn't that your husband's wedding ring?" Joe stopped unwrapping the gift, stared at him, perplexed, and took the ring. She glanced at Deirdre, who quietly muttered, "I tried to tell you." Undeterred, Joe continued tearing off the wrapping from the present, revealing a white gift box inside. Feeling relieved, she smiled, gave the box a little shake, remarked on its weight, and began to peel off the tape on each side using her fingernail. As the tape on the third side came off, the contents of the box spilled out, scattering across the floor. She crouched down to gather the glossy sheets that had fallen. Others also squatted to help pick up the ones that had slid away. All of a sudden, everyone came to a halt. Joe's eyes widened and she shouted, "No!" Her cry grabbed the attention of those nearby, and more people gathered around them. Deirdre's eyes also widened in disbelief. She looked up and saw the horror-struck expression on George's face. He picked up a large glossy color photograph measuring 20 x 30 centimeters from the ground, placed it against his expensive suit, and involuntarily yelled, "What the heck, Joe?" He said it loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Everyone's attention turned to the scattered pictures, which depicted Joe engaging in sexual activities with people other than her husband. There were numerous images of Joe with George, as well as Joe alongside other executives from the company where Mike and Joe worked, including her colleagues and bosses. While the pictures didn't cover every position, Mike had carefully chosen ones that clearly showed Josephine engaging in shocking activities with both men and women in various combinations and quantities. Confronted with these graphic photos of her sexual escapades, Joe fainted. She fell onto her back, and George's shoe prevented her head from hitting the tile floor, potentially causing a concussion. Deirdre knelt down next to her, lifted her head, lightly slapped her face, and urgently shouted, "Joe, Joe, are you okay? Talk to me, Joe." As both women lay on the floor, others began picking up the pictures and examining them. A woman turned and struck her husband with all her might just as he was looking at the picture he held. "You're a cheater," she exclaimed. "No wonder you don't have the energy left to satisfy me." He stared at her in shock, and then she swung her purse, landing a punch on his right eye. He grimaced in pain and then crumbled to the floor when she kicked him in the groin with her pointed shoe. The woman knelt down and systematically went through the pictures scattered on the ground. She paused, glanced up, and declared, "You ladies who are married to the higher-ups at Taylor & Son might want to check out some of these photos. There are images of other husbands in here as well. If you're looking to save on divorce attorneys, give me a call and we can explore a group rate." 9 other women knelt down, joining her and examining the photos, causing the men to back away. "There are also flash drives here," one of them announced loudly. "Who knows what's on them?" A woman directed her anger at a well-dressed older man shouting, "You dirty cheater. Remember our prenup? You're financially ruined, you jerk." The man tried to explain, saying, "Baby, I'm sorry. It didn't mean anything. She kept coming on to me and eventually I gave in. But it happened only once. And she wasn't as good as you anyway. You're lying. Liar," the blonde woman shouted, holding out 2 more pictures. The blonde woman stood up from the floor. Her eyes filled with anger, and she confronted him, waving the pictures and unleashing a string of profanities. He stepped back, turned, and fled. Meanwhile, the other woman sobbed, clutching her chest with one hand and holding a photograph with the other. Her husband, hiding his face in his hands, was also in tears. The man took out a photo, holding it up to the attractive woman standing in front of him, and exclaimed loudly, "So you're bisexual? What the heck is this? You kept telling me there would never be a 3 because you wouldn't be with another woman." She blushed, turned around, and hurried away, struggling in her 10-inch heels. Another woman chose several photos from the pile and began calling out names as she headed toward the center of the ballroom. The puzzled woman stopped her, picked up a photo, stared at it, and turned to her husband with a furious expression. He started to back away and she quickly moved toward him, waving the photograph. This situation repeated 5 more times, with each victim's friends also being hit in their ears and eyes. Note: the original text included asterisks here, which I replaced with explanatory text. Jo was already awake, observing the chaos around her with dazed eyes. A man in an elegant tuxedo knelt beside her and inquired, "Are you okay?" She looked at him with curiosity and nodded. He asked, "Who are you? Can I help you?" She responded solemnly, "I'm Josephine Lord. But I don't believe anyone can assist me at this point." "Are you Josephine Reynolds, Lord?" he asked in disbelief. She nodded and inquired, "Yes, I am. And who are you?" The man handed her the stack of papers he was carrying, took a photo of her with his phone, and loudly declared, "I am the bailiff. You've been served. Josephine Reynolds Lord." These documents, along with the accompanying photos and videos, substantiate the cheating claimed in Michael Morris's Lord's divorce petition. He turned toward the gathered crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't had a chance to review the photos, you can simply request a copy of the divorce papers, which are public records accessible online. They list the names of all the individuals Joe W.B. has engaged in sexual activity with over the past year, along with when and where. For a small fee, I can provide a link to Joe QB's website, which comprehensively details her action since January 1 the previous year. If you wish to examine this information to determine whether your spouse has been involved in intimate relationships with SHB and some Sims or more, you can contact me via Cheating Spouse, PCOM. For an additional fee, I'll provide a link to our site. I can supply digital copies of the participants' actions. This evidence will prove invaluable in court. I anticipate your response." He bowed deeply and walked away, leaving behind a trail of tears, fear, and panic. He might face consequences for this act in the future, but he was compensated handsomely for it. Plus, being in New York and having his office in New Jersey, where his influential family held sway, offered him a sense of security. Jo still had the divorce papers in her lap, resting in her friend's arms, her mouth open in confusion. She glanced at the faces around her, seeing a mix of hatred, pity, anger, and unease. Of admiration, desire, and jealousy that she had experienced throughout her privileged life was conspicuously absent. The full weight of her loss and shame hit her, and she held on to Deirdre tightly, burying her face in her friend's chest, sobbing uncontrollably. George Taylor instructed his subordinates to gather the incriminating and destroy them. Looking directly at Helen, he commanded, "I want a reprimand letter for Mike Lord on my desk by Monday, with the termination papers underneath." Helen responded with a neutral expression. "I'm sorry, Mr. Taylor, but Mr. Lord resigned this afternoon. He provided 2 weeks' notice, utilized the vacation time you approved last week, packed up all his belongings and left the building." Mr. Taylor's response was firm. "I won't accept his resignation. I'll fire him after giving him a reprimand. He won't find work in this industry again." However, Helen continued, "I apologize again, Mr. Taylor, but he spoke to the chairman of the board before leaving. Your father accepted his resignation. Mr. Lord has already secured another position with the firm he previously consulted for. With your written approval, sir." Taylor's face was so red that people around were worried he might have a stroke. He was angrily swearing at his father and Mike Lord. Helen and her husband found the situation amusing, holding hands and enjoying the embarrassment. They didn't show their amusement on their faces, though. Mike Lord drove from New York in a new four-wheel drive Chevy High Country Suburban with a big turbo diesel engine. He had ordered this special engine in addition to the regular features. He ordered the SUV in to reach his new home in Austin, Texas using the route he chose. However, he knew it would likely take him almost a week because he planned to experience and learn about the culture of the rural states he would be passing through. When he reached Virginia, he planned to avoid the main highways and take the scenic country roads mentioned in John Denver's songs. He also wanted to explore the small towns in the Carolinas that Mary Chapon Carpenter sang about. He was excited to try the local homemade jellies and jams sold at small stores along the roadside. He intended to eat where the locals did, away from the busy highways and the lifestyle he had grown tired of. Mike and his wife had separate checking and savings accounts. But this changed after he bought his SUV. Because she had earned 10 times more money than him during their marriage, buying an $88,000 car wouldn't really balance things out. Still, he was fine using some of her money to purchase it. As per his proposal, he would keep his investments and retirement funds and she would hold on to hers. If she agreed to his generous terms and signed the divorce papers within 10 days, he wouldn't make any claims on her penthouse or trust fund. The car's radio was set to play the best classic country music on Sirius XM station called the Roadhouse. Joe disliked country music almost as much as he disliked true music. So he'd switched to the classic vinyl station next. He was his own person now. No longer the uninformed husband she had portrayed him as for the last couple of years. When the New Year's ball dropped the previous year, he had taken control of his life and spent the entire year organizing his thoughts. Perhaps Taylor and Son, the company he used to be part of, would survive after he left, but he didn't believe it would do well. Operating under George's poor leadership and lacking the design improvements and patents he had contributed over the last 5 years, he anticipated it would collapse within a year or two. He found satisfaction in this idea, knowing that his efforts had driven more than half of the new sales and profits in the previous year. He also had top-notch designs and improvements ready to implement as soon as his new company became operational. Oh, his former boss, who is now the head of the board, and George's father Randolph Taylor, would likely sell the company before it failed. However, George would be revealed as the incapable fraud he truly was before that point. The idea of that made him happy. Tonight, He had successfully portrayed George and his own unfaithful wife as immoral members of society with no principles. In the next year, when his new company outperformed his old one, he would expose George's lack of business skills just like squashing a bug on a windshield. Thinking about this brought a smile to his face. He didn't mind being a fly on the wall. Observing when Josephine's parents learned about his actions at the ball, Helen had already called him to share the positive outcome. The fact that she had spread the photos all over the ballroom was even better than he had hoped, although he had intentionally designed the box to fall apart when the film was cut on 3 sides. Her parents had always looked down on him, and they were disappointed when their precious daughter decided to marry him. They thought he wasn't good enough, especially because he didn't have an Ivy League education. The reality that his engineering degree from the Colorado School of Mines and master's degree from the University of Michigan made him highly sought after in his field mattered more than an arts degree from Brown University. With a smile, he thought about the chaos he had caused and the achievements he would create in the future. Deirdre and her husband, Albert, drove Josephine back home right after they entered the house, and she took a look around. Jo began crying again. During the ride home, she practiced what she would say to Mike. She needed to clarify that her affairs didn't mean much to her and weren't damaging their marriage. She wanted to explain that these were like a break or an effort to influence decisions that affected both her and Mike, aiming to improve their lives. She tried to justify that casual sexual encounters actually helped them. They helped her manage her strong sexual desire and also taught her things. She used to please her husband to add variety to their intimate life. It sounded ridiculous even to herself, and she was fully aware that Mike wouldn't believe it. The truth was he was very committed to their marriage vows. Even discussing the idea of swapping partners or engaging in role-play with others angered him. So why did she think he would accept the excuses she was planning to give? Deep down, she understood that her marriage was falling apart. However, when she entered their apartment and saw that all of his belongings were gone, she realized she had fallen into a pit she had created herself. She collapsed to the floor, crying and feeling bitter, blaming her own arrogance. She couldn't easily explain her actions because she never thought she would get caught. And if by some chance she did, she believed she could convince her kind innocent husband to forgive her. For 3 years, she had been successful in hiding her actions. But tonight, he destroyed both their marriage and her reputation completely. The week went by swiftly for Mike. He copied his SIM card before throwing away the old one in the slushy city snow. This way, he could reach out without any interruptions while traveling through the Old South on his way to his new home in Texas. He sent his custom emails throughout the week. Each spouse received a personalized email with an attachment, causing marriage after marriage to fall apart. The thought of this outcome brought a grin to Mike's face. He had mailed the letter to Deirdre's husband just yesterday. Mike felt a sense of satisfaction thinking about how Al might react. Although Jo was accountable for her actions, it was Deirdre's account of the pleasure she found in her affairs, along with her friends' encouragement to share the enjoyment by being promiscuous. That truly influenced Jo's decision. On 4th day back in New York, Deirdre and Jo sat on the couch in their apartment. Now it was just their apartment as Al had kicked Deirdre out after receiving an email containing a video. The video included snippets of sexual activity and a revealing conversation between Jo and Deirdre, where they described their conquests and pleasures and listed the names of their lovers. They even laughed about their unsuspecting husbands. Albert forwarded this conversation to the wives of the women mentioned, especially if he knew them, which was often the case. The turmoil was spreading and Albert found satisfaction as he watched it unfold. Things weren't any better for George either. His father had fired him and cut him off from his inheritance. In fact, his father had also fired all the top executives who were responsible for the company's negative reputation due to their actions. His father was now acting as the CEO while his new vice president of talent development and attraction, Helen, was recruiting skilled executives from around the world. As he drove past, Mike skipped the Martin Luther King Boulevard exit and got ready to make a turn onto Cesar Chavez Street. He drove by the Austin Convention Center and noticed Lady Bird Lake on his left. He crossed Congress Avenue and parked at the exclusive high-rise apartment that his new company had arranged for him. He had paid 6 months' rent in advance for the apartment, which was on the 70th floor and offered a view of the rainy city. This gave him time to search for the kind of house he had always wanted, complete with trees and a lawn. Once he was settled, he planned to get a dog and start looking for a reliable partner who would enjoy building a life with him and their children. His new business partners had already organized a barbecue event, where they would introduce him as recently divorced, ensuring there would be plenty of eligible women there. Meanwhile, in New York City, the ongoing drama continued as exposed spouses implicated others and abusive partners shared information about other abusive partners. Helen kept Mike updated about the situation. He thought about the spreading chaos caused by the fire he had ignited in New York, and couldn't help but smile. The more he learned, the more excited he became about his decision to move to Texas. He thought about it with a sense of finality, repeating "gone to Texas." My wife is a strong supporter of feminism and places great importance on her independence. This has influenced our married life, making it more like two independent individuals living together rather than a traditional married couple. She devotes a significant amount of her time to her work and personal projects, both at her job and in our home, which creates a dynamic environment. As a result, my role often feels more like that of a roommate rather than a typical spouse. I'm a 35-year-old guy who got married to a software developer 2 years ago. I have a career in accounting, which doesn't demand as much of my time and effort as my wife's job does. She has a strong desire to prove herself and out-earn me, which leads her to continuously take on various projects. After we got married, she began to view household tasks as a test of her pride and started expecting me to handle most of the domestic responsibilities. Due to her work commitments, my wife is often away from home during dinner hours. She prefers either eating at her workplace or getting food delivered online. As a result, we mainly spend time together on weekends. She intentionally keeps her distance from her married cousins and friends who have embraced the roles of homemakers and mothers. She prioritizes her independent lifestyle over that. I've noticed that at social gatherings, she tends to make negative comments about housewives, referring to them as servants in private conversations. I consistently tried to have open conversations with her, encouraging her to avoid making fun of women who chose different paths in life. However, she remained firm in her stance, stating that she couldn't picture herself living without a career, seeing it as a sign of failure. She took a lot of pride in her job and career, and sometimes it came off as arrogance, which often frustrated me. Despite that, I have to admit she treated me well and showed kindness to me almost every day. She'd express her love with gifts and affectionate texts throughout the day filled with, "I love you," and "I'd miss you." Her caring and consideration towards me were impressive, and I was content with our romantic life. In the bedroom, she took the lead to make sure I was happy. Recently, one of her cousins visited our town, and it was the first time they had seen each other since childhood. So we hosted a dinner to create a warm family gathering. My wife had certain expectations about her cousin, assuming she'd be a stay-at-home mom or someone facing career challenges. But to her surprise, her cousin had become a successful dentist with a stable income. This unexpected news bruised my wife's pride, as she was used to bragging about her own achievements. She couldn't help but feel jealous of anyone who had achieved more success. To try and compete with her accomplished cousin, my wife took on an extra job during the weekends, aiming to achieve greater success and wealth within our family. As a result, we didn't have much time together. One of her colleagues, Rob, from her new job, would frequently come over to our place to work together on coding and programming tasks. They were actively involved in working on important personal projects and planned to launch them soon. since there was a significant age gap between Rob, my wife and me. I never felt threatened by his presence at our home. Actually, Rob and I would sometimes play some games together during their breaks. And he would even cook delicious meals for us, being in his 20s. Unlike me, Rob wasn't burdened with marriage or a lot of responsibilities. He was fully focused on their project and work. It was clear that he was actively dating, frequently changing girlfriends, and exploring various relationships. Because of our experience and relationships, my wife and I often found ourselves giving Rob advice in that area. On nights when they had to work late, Rob would stay over in our guest room. My wife made the choice to leave her full-time job to fully commit herself to the significant project she was collaborating on with Rob. They both put their hearts into their work, working extremely hard to make their ambitious project a reality. Being someone who values hard work, I fully supported my wife and Rob in their efforts. My wife had a strict attitude when it came to their work. If Rob ever seemed lazy, she would show her displeasure and make a big deal out of it. She emphasized that this project was her most important accomplishment, and she wouldn't tolerate any mistakes or shortcuts in how it was done. To keep things peaceful and prevent Rob from getting scared or leaving, I often found myself trying to mediate between my wife and him during their arguments. Knowing that my wife had a tendency to get angry, I made an effort to take Rob's side in order to calm her down. I needed to make sure their collaboration continued smoothly, especially when we were with our friends and family. My wife took a lot of pride in her new projects and loved to show off about them, proudly talking about her achievements to others, but because of her excessive pride and arrogance, our old friends and family slowly stopped inviting us to events and get-togethers in response to this behavior. Rob stepped up and organized small picnics and even treated us to concert tickets, giving us chances to relax and take a break from our demanding work schedules. Our social circle got smaller, including just me, my wife, Rob, and whichever woman Rob was dating at the time. Despite having fewer people around, we found happiness in each other's company. My wife always had this ongoing need to compete with Rob's girlfriends. She was convinced that her unique blend of beauty and intelligence made her better than them. She always took every chance to show off her qualities. Sometimes I would get really frustrated with my wife's self-centered behavior. During a big argument between us, Rob was the one who stepped in to calm things down and mend our relationship. He played a role in trying to make peace between us and bring back harmony. Over time, Rob had become like a younger brother to me, and I had complete trust in him. I even offered him the option to move in with us, but he declined politely, understanding that we needed some space. He was already spending most days and nights at our place. My wife and Rob were working hard on a project that was almost done, and their efforts were starting to pay off. They worked tirelessly on their laptops, coding and programming day and night, taking on more work as the pressure increased. My wife's irritability grew worse. She often directed her frustration at Rob, yelling and letting out her anger on him. Surprisingly, she never once complained to me about her workload. On the other hand, Rob had to deal with her bad moods and manage his own substantial workload at the same time. Challenges of the project while dealing with my wife's unpredictable temper. One evening, I ended up going to my company's annual dinner by myself since my wife was busy with work while I was getting ready for the event. Rob, who was also busy with their project, kept making comments about my tie choices. After a while, I settled on a red tie and said my goodbyes. I got to the dinner venue before our boss. I couldn't help but see that everyone else was wearing blue or gray ties. It was quite different from my red one. To my surprise, they told me that the tie color was actually part of a planned theme, and they had talked about it in a WhatsApp group that I didn't catch. As I looked at my red tie, wondering if I should change it, I started to feel bored. The event hadn't started yet, and there was still some time before dinner. So I spontaneously decided to go back home and switch my tie. I was curious about Rob's reaction and wanted to playfully interact with him. I thought it would be fun to surprise him with a different tie when I got back. As I unlocked the door and walked into the house, I was surprised to find that the room where Rob and my wife had been working was empty. They were nowhere in sight. I suspected that Rob and my wife might have argued, leading him to leave and her going to our bedroom. With this thought, I went into our bedroom to change my tie, but what I walked in on completely shocked me. I was utterly dismayed to find Rob and my wife in a highly intimate situation on our own bed without any clothes on. What I saw was way beyond anything I could have imagined, and it was deeply disturbing and disgusting to witness. Both Rob and my wife were taken by surprise and filled with horror when they saw me unexpectedly entering the house. They had wrongly assumed that I would be gone for several more hours and took advantage of that. A mix of anger and despair surged through me, making my temples throb with the rush of blood. I ignored them and quickly headed toward the room where they used to work together. My intentions were hidden in a cloud of intense emotions. Filled by anger, I swiftly found their laptops before they could react, and forcefully threw them against the wall. The laptops, which held years of their hard work, broke into pieces on impact. Then I deliberately chose to take the broken laptops outside, making sure they couldn't be salvaged or fixed. Thankfully, the USB drives were connected to the laptops at the time, so they had no way to recover or store their important data in their state of desperation. They begged me to stop their uncontrollable sobs, showing how devastated they were by their lost efforts. My wife tried to explain that their actions were a result of exhaustion and stress from work. However, instead of calming my anger, it actually made it worse. I was overwhelmed by shock and the feeling of being betrayed. So I had to make the difficult decision to forcefully kick both my wife and Rob out of our home. Discovering their intimate connection, despite my wife treating Rob like a little brother and the lack of any previous signs, deepened my feelings of pain and betrayal. I never thought something like this could happen to me. I let everyone know about my wife's actions, which greatly distressed her. She's always cared about her image among her peers. And because of this, she fell into a state of depression. The project she had dedicated years to was ruined, and her professional partnership with Rob came to an end. She's now relying on medication to manage her state of mind and finding it hard to complete her work due to her unstable mental condition. Her workload has significantly decreased, and she can't maintain a full-time job. In an email, she expressed her apologies. She feels an immense sense of guilt for the failure of her dream project and believes she's solely responsible for her shortcomings, which has some truth to it. However, when I served her with divorce papers, she didn't react well. Struggling to come to terms with the situation, she finds it very tough to handle failure in her career, marriage, and other parts of her life. This makes it difficult for her to keep going. The setbacks she's faced have taken away her pride. Some might argue that the danger of pride is its potential to lead to one's downfall if arrogance persists. It can make it hard to connect with a higher power or grasp the essence of spirituality. When someone is consumed by pride, they tend to adopt a condescending attitude toward others, which hinders their ability to see beyond their own point of view. As for my decision to divorce and move forward, I found comfort in that choice. Both my ex-spouse and my old friends are now reaching out and offering their support. They've come to realize the hurtful behavior my wife displayed toward them, which had led them to exclude us from their gatherings before. Since parting ways with my wife, I've regained the backing of my friends. Engaging in activities like camping and hunting has revitalized my spirit and lifted the depression I used to feel. My wife used to foster competition between me and my friends, but now I'm free from that mindset. I no longer feel the need to pursue wealth just to outshine or dominate my companions. Thanks for listening to the whole story. And if you enjoyed it, please show your support with a like and consider subscribing to our channel. Leave your thoughts in the comments about what you think of the story.